Frogger can be considered a lot of things by the typical gamer. An addictive stealth game about a group of frogs just trying to make it home and keep themselves safe from all the hazards lurking about. He's a character who's a master of frog jutsu and can expand his cheeks. Wrong image! And in pretty much all cases, he's a character that's well known amongst the overall community of gamers, both old and new. This is the character who we're gonna make a Smash moveset for today. But before we do that, who exactly is Frogger? And what's his deal? Said the 3 people that don't know. Frogger is one of those characters, similar to Pac-Man, that have gone through a lot of changes throughout the years ever since his debut in the arcades. Also like Pac-Man, some of those changes in design and style can be pretty good, and sometimes he looks like he's featured in his own horror movie. Regardless, he's one of the rare characters in the gaming industry that can be recognized by literally everyone. I bet if you ask your dad, your mom, your great aunt Faith, your sister doing TikTok dances in your bathroom right now.
I'm so confused.
The interesting thing about Frogger though is the fact that while he's iconic in his own right, I don't know if it's just me, but it sort of feels like he isn't in the forefront of the average person's mind when thinking about iconic video game characters. Having said that though, no one can take the little guy's legacy. But speaking of that, how did the Frogger franchise get to this point exactly? What company exactly owns the Frogger franchise? And how the hell am I supposed to make a moveset out of a character who's only known for jumping and avoiding cars for a living? Well, gamers and game readers, I think you forgot who you're talking to. A loser who sits at home all day and has way too much free time? Exactly. Let's get into it. So let's start off with the franchise's backstory. What exactly are the origins of the Frogger game? Frogger is an extremely old video game franchise that came out in 1981, released in the days of the arcade. As to which company owns the series itself, so the franchise itself was developed by Konami, you know, the company that made Edgy He-Man and Snake Guy, but manufactured by Sega, which I assume means they were responsible for things like Frogger being on the arcade machines and some other logistics, as it seems that Sega had quite the prolific background with arcades and the technology behind it. But don't quote me on that, this is just an educated guess for me. In North America, however, it's slightly different, as it was apparently published by Sega and a company by the name of Gremlin Industries. Now, fortunately, we're not going to have to worry about them that much, as you'll see later on. For the sake of making things less complicated, though, it seems universally accepted that the franchise is owned by Konami, so we'll just say that and move on. But hold on, wait. What the hell is Gremlin Industries? Like, you just get past that whole arc. Don't worry, guys. I got this. So apparently they were an arcade manufacturer that was based in San Diego, California, starting in 1971, and unfortunately had a decently short run as it was closed down in 1983. So this kind of explains the mindset they had when the idea was pitched to them originally to have Frogger distributed to them. Honestly, at the point Frogger was pitched to them, it was nearing towards the latter half of Gremlin's life, and I can imagine that when they saw a picture of a frog, they were probably shaking in their boots as Vietnam War flashbacks invaded their mind. But why do I say that though? Well, because Gremlin Studios had already actually worked on an arcade game involving frogs that completely and utterly failed. And the name of this arcade game was Frogs. Oh my god. For those of you guys who don't know what Frogs is, allow me to explain. So real quick, Frogs was an arcade game created by Gremlin back in 1978, and it basically had you, a frog, jump up and collect different bugs, and depending on the bugs you collect, whether that be butterflies or dragonflies, you get a certain amount of points. Ultimately, the project was seen as a failure by Gremlin. Therefore comes the PTSD to work on another project involving frogs in a very similar manner. They were not confident this Frogger idea would do well whatsoever, so they were very reluctant to participate. There were other reasons that they didn't want to take the risk either, specifically the game looking way too basic to them with its gameplay, which I can imagine they didn't get how people were going to be interested in a game about frogs crossing the street when games like Space Invaders or Asteroids seemed like the more desirable option at the time. Another reason Gremlin were reluctant to distribute Frogger was because the presentation looked too kawaii desu, since the characters in Frogger were nothing more with frogs and a tie-on. Though I don't really know how they found this to be cute, but to each their own. It stinks too because the main idea man behind Frogger, Akira Hashimoto, got the idea while driving to a pond and noticing a frog there, in which he stopped to let it go, and that's where he got the idea from. Such a wholesome way to think of a video game. All for nothing because those absolute hooligans from Gremlins released a frog game that didn't do well. Keep in mind that the two games played nothing alike, besides them obviously both being about frogs. But just when it all seemed to look bleak and we weren't gonna get the Frogger game that we all asked for, someone swooped in to single-handedly save the series. Enter in Elizabeth Falconer. Now, I just want to say that I couldn't find a definite image of her whatsoever, despite how much I look, unless you want me to believe she was born in 1801. But in doing research, she was described as being delicate with blonde hair. So we'll just have her being represented with... Close enough. Alright, let's get back to the history lesson. Enter in Elizabeth Falconer, a market researcher at Sega Gremlin, who looked at the game and thought maybe that Gremlin should give the game a shot and distribute it to arcades. She thought that the game should have a chance to thrive and that it deserved a chance at the very least. So, after she realized that the game should be published and at least given a chance, she quickly figured out the reasons Gremlin threw the game pitch away, which she heavily disagreed with. So eventually, she got the chance to pitch the idea of Frogger to the Gremlin executives again, somehow being able to persuade them this time to give the game a shot. Now, how did she do so exactly? Well, personally, I think it's arson, but apparently the actual reason is because she told them that they made a similar mistake rejecting Pac-Man for similar reasons, yet look at the success that game did. But I mean, arson, Pac-Man, they're basically the same thing.
Do not cry for him!
Oh god, what the hell? Wait, where am I? Spanky's Saloon? I'm just not gonna ask. Oh wait, actually, hold on, wait, hold on. Okay, Elizabeth Falconer. Oh! Alright then. Well, gamers and gamer readers, this spot right here is where they actually put the Frogger cabinet. How convenient. Now, while Gremlin did agree to the pitch, allowing Falconer and Sega to playtest a prototype for the game with a 60-day licensing window, Gremlin really were all types of petty that day, really living up to the name, because they put the game in a place where there are primarily grown men in the bar. And remember, Gremlin full well knew that this game would appeal to primarily kids and women, and they decided to put the game in a small bar filled with dudes. But there was one thing that Gremlin forgot in their plan to ruin Frogger forever. Men have feelings too, damn it. I also want to protect my frog spawn from being killed by trucks. Is that only a thing that women can get the joy of? And yeah, after that was pretty hit success. So, despite Frogger being stacked against all odds, it managed to be a crazy hit in the saloon, thus giving Frogger the green light to be released by Sega in 1981. And, as you can tell from it earning over $135 million, being one of the top grossing arcade games in North America, the 12th highest grossing arcade game in Japan, the home version of the game earning $40 million at launch, and it being labeled as one of the pioneers of the popular new generation of games that took away from the cliche of the space genre, I think it did pretty well for itself. Frogger, similar to Pac-Man, had an overall design that appealed to everyone, and was essentially a breath of fresh air from the other arcade games that were present, as starting from the bottom of the level and making your way up to the top of the screen was something that hasn't been done before, at least in the way that Frogger presented it. Combine that with its amazing reception to it going onto home consoles like the Atari, and you have the recipe for a household name. Insane how something that Gremlin labeled as one of its biggest weaknesses ended up becoming its biggest strength in the long run. Now, believe it or not, I know this is hard to believe, but Frogger has a pretty simple game premise, which is obviously a standard for arcade games since the repetition makes for more addictive gameplay for you to come back and play over and over again. But the game also had a formula at the time that really set itself apart from other arcade games, which in my opinion is how Frogger managed to stand the test of time and didn't fall to the wayside like other arcade titles. You have 5 frogs total trying to make it across the road where a bunch of cars appear. Then you go through a bunch of obstacles in the water section, a bunch of logs and turtles, all the way to the very top where there are frog holes present, with plenty of other obstacles that'll get in your way, and more that get spawned in as you progress through the level. In the log section, you have bonus frogs, where if you grab one, you get extra points added to your final score. From there, all you have to do is avoid the obstacles and get 5 frogs into the frog hole to progress to the next level. Now, the unique part about Frogger, and why the original arcade game manages to stand out, is in its gameplay. That's my opinion at the very least. Compared to the other arcade games, Frogger actually has an overall more passive style to it, differentiating it between arcade games like Donkey Kong and Street Fighter. In games like Donkey Kong, where you're trying to save your girl from a giant monkey, Galaga, where you're a spaceship shooting down other spaceships, Street Fighter, where you have to be beaten senseless by every able-bodied patron in the bar. Even in Pac-Man, you have multiple opportunities to fight back against the ghost by getting a power pellet. Then you have Frogger, which in itself is a very passive experience, like I said before, since they can't fight back because they're just frogs. Now, obviously, I'm not saying this is an absolute absolute fact, but I can imagine that this more passive gameplay style was a breath of fresh air to people back then, thus having it outlast a lot of other arcade games. Ironically, the thing I could best compare Frogger to in terms of gameplay is Metal Gear. Both games heavily involve the concept of stealth, in which you're basically sneaking past a way more powerful enemy that you can't just brute force your way through like you can other arcade games. This may be one of the reasons why even today, the Frogger series is still kicking. It may not have the incredible legacy that Mario or Pac-Man has nowadays, but Frogger has a lot of games too, with one of the most recent ones coming out in 2022. And similar to the Pac-Man titles, a lot of Frogger games seem to have a lot of creative liberty as to what it could be, whether it be a simple frog crossing the street game, a plot where Frogger has to stop an evil crocodile named Dr. Waney from creating mind control helmets in order to stop him from completely taking over the world as we know it. Yeah, I'll just stick with trying not to get run over by the colorful cars. The interesting thing though is that despite the range of Frogger's lore and plot, the overall gameplay of a frog trying to avoid obstacles and being susceptible to taking damage and dying is the one thing carried throughout damn near all the games, which I think is something we should take note of, so keep that in the back of your head. So now that we've covered all that, let's talk about the lad's Smash Bros history real quick before we get into the official moveset. Now I think it's fair to say that deciding if Frogger has the legacy and iconic status to join Smash Bros is a pretty stupid question. I mean, after all, the guy was in Wreck-It Ralph. Combine this with Nintendo's collective love for old video game characters and the fact that they've worked with Konami before, obtaining characters like Snake and Simon Belmont, and you'd think Frogger being in Smash Bros would make a lot of sense. Now, funnily enough, despite me saying that, Frogger being in Smash Bros, a game that literally celebrates gaming history by inviting iconic characters constantly, hasn't really been talked about that much in the community. In fact, to my knowledge, there was only one remotely significant time where Frogger was mentioned in a Smash leak of any sort, and that was on October 29th, 2019. To give you guys a time frame, this was after the announcement of Terry Bogard, the 4th DLC character in Fighter Pass 1, to get announced for Smash Bros Ultimate, and before we knew any information about the final DLC character for the Fighter Pass. To summarize, the leaker in question came out with a post talking about Terry's inevitable video presentation and information regarding it, saying that he was going to be released on November 6, 2019, and that it was going to come with a Geese, Heihachi, Lloyd Irving, and Hollow Knight Mii Fighter outfit. The leaker also said that the stage that we had already seen in the Banjo presentation video was called King of Fighters Stadium, and that there was going to be an online mode called Slip Space coming with the version 6.0 update. Now that was the leaker's main set of posts, but he apparently had some inklings to who the final character was for Fighter Pass 1, along with some of the other fighters that were going to come in the next batch of fighters for Fighter Pass 2. He said that Doom Guy was going to be the final character for Fighter Pass 1, and that he only knew 2 characters that were coming in Fighter Pass 2, those being Gino and, you guessed it, Alolan Raichu. Anyways though, the leaker wasn't sure what exactly was to come with their respective passes, so ultimately he just left it there. But yeah, unless my eyes deceive me, that isn't Doom Guy, and Gino ended up as a Mii costume being released during Sephiroth's Fighter Pass. But other than that, yeah, this leak was completely wrong. It's funny too because the other 2 characters that the leaker mentioned were the 2 characters that I've also done moveset videos for. Anyways, with Frogger having his 15 minutes of fame, nothing else really happened in terms of his Smash Bros lore, so that's pretty much where the backstory ends. And I think the main reason as to why this is the case is because, well, how are you gonna make an interesting moveset out of a character whose only thing is that he hops around a lot, and sometimes sticks his tongue out? Now, one thing to keep in mind is that I'm not talking about making an actual moveset for it. You can make a moveset for damn near every video game character that has arms and legs, but it's making an interesting moveset and one that's not a completely bland moveset that's gonna stand out from the rest, and that's what we have to accomplish today. And if that weren't enough, the other thing is we already have a frog character in Smash Bros, and he also sticks his tongue out quite a lot, and in fact he never puts the damn thing away. So that makes differentiating Frogger even harder because you can't make him a Greninja 2.0 and just have a bunch of generic kicking, punching, and tongue attacks. And then on top of all of that, a lot of the Frogger games that have other moves and attacks can't really be referenced too much for reasons I'll get into later. So little to say, this is probably going to be one of the hardest characters for me to try and make a moveset for. I mean, I've seen posts of people believing that giving Frogger a moveset is literally impossible, but as someone who refuses to touch grass in the slightest, I decided to take the task of making Frogger a Smash character and having it make sense. So, let's get right into it. Now, before we get into specifics, there's a few things I want to explain in terms of his overall design. So going into this, I wanted to treat Frogger similarly to how Sakurai treated Pac-Man back in Smash 4, as both characters kind of have similar backgrounds and similar problems to each other. Both come from pretty simplistic games that have quite a few different redesigns and visions overall throughout the years. With Pac-Man, it seemed like Sakurai focused on the other games for inspiration for moveset and design, since those games are the ones that people would recognize the most. Also, I think because there's been so much creative freedom as to what people ended up doing with Frogger, we should stick with the most iconic version of him from here on out, which is why I didn't really talk about the other Frogger series that much, like Frogger's Adventures on the Game Boy Advance, and like a bunch of other titles that I could talk about, but I feel like it wouldn't work. I feel like focusing on all the games will cause me to lose focus as to who Frogger originally is as a character. Thus will kind of make his Smash moveset very sloppy, if that makes any sense. So similar to Pac-Man, I'm going to focus primarily on the most iconic version of Frogger, which is the original arcade version. But don't get it twisted, there are some things that I do kind of want to change, and that I think would be a little different from Pac-Man. Let's start off with things like SFX and sound effects. I think for that in particular, replicating what they did with characters in the Donkey Kong series would probably be best, where they have those fighters sounding like actual monkeys or crocodiles instead of going the more cartoon route and giving them actual voice acting. And I don't mean that these characters don't have voice acting attached to them, I just mean that instead of actually saying things or something along those lines like they canonically do in the games, they instead do grunts and stuff, which is a more realistic approach to their sound design. Now with Frogger, it would be that, but obviously with frog noises instead, which is already pretty close to what they do in a lot of Frogger games where they have him sound like an actual frog, with the croaking and ribbits being heavily present. Now in terms of how he literally looks in the game, and what design to go with, whether we go with a mishmash or whether we go with a specific version of him, Frogger's has so many different variations over the years, it's crazy. There's the more cartoonish Frogger that we see in games like the designs from Frogger's Journey, The Forgotten Relic, Frogger's Ancient Shadow, Frogger's Adventure the Rescue, and Frogger's Helmet Chaos. Then you have the obvious realistic design that you have in the arcade titles in games like Frogger and Toy Town. And then you have this. We're not going to talk about this, but I think the design that I ended up going with is a combination of the original design and his design in He's Back Frogger, or Frogger on the original PlayStation, whichever one you recognize that title as. And this is kind of similar to what Sakurai ultimately chose for Pac-Man's design, based on his original design that he goes into for some of his moves, and his design from Pac-Land with him having arms and legs. The other thing we should talk about is how Frogger would act in terms of animations and overall movement. Since Frogger is such a blank slated character that's gotten a lot of different redesigns over the years, I think it would be most appropriate to focus on more of a cartoonish style to his overall movement and combat, similar to how characters like Banjo-Kazooie and Duck Hunt move and act while fighting. You know, the typical slapstick like exaggerated facial expressions when being hit, enlarging certain body parts for dramatic effect, you know, the usual. This would also help give a bit more pizzazz to the Frogger that we're currently working with, so I think it ultimately works out. And I guess the last aesthetic thing we can talk about for now is his walking animations. With Frogger, very similar to a large majority of the games, would hop one space at a time. This also applied to his running animation, where it'd basically be the same thing as the walking animation, but significantly faster, of just him hopping. And now for the meat and potatoes, let's get into the moveset. Going into Frogger's basic movements, we have his jab attack to start off with, which I think would be a standard 3-hit combo, using the red fish from Frogger 2 3 Deep to slap the opponent 3 times. Going into specifics, it would be 2 fish slaps to the side and a slam down. Then he also has a multi-hit, where after smacking him with the red fish, Frogger brings out this purple fish right here with the teeth. Or at least I think that's teeth, I can't exactly figure it out. For the multi-hit, the purple fish would come and munch the opponent multiple times with a big crunch at the end as a strong finisher. In fact, apparently there's 2 of those things in a different color scheme, like one's black and then one's like purple. So let's just say that it alternates between the black one and the purple one. For Frogger's dash attack, he basically does a tumble and rolls into the fighter. Similar to Sonic's dash attack, except Frogger's is more accidental rather than intentional. This doesn't really reference anything, I thought this would just fit what I'm going for Frogger's portrayal and character in general. Either way, next we have his tilts. So guys, we obviously gotta have a tongue attack of some sort. I mean, he is a frog, and on top of that, there are multiple games where he does tongue attacks to get butterflies and stuff. And also, He's a frog. Now, I'm not going to put a tongue attack for too many moves because, like I said, I want to distinguish him from Greninja as best I possibly can. And considering that Greninja is a disgusting weirdo that wraps his tongue around his whole neck, like Greninja, if you need a scarf, I'm near a Bloomingdale's. I can drive you there if you need one. Regardless, we're going to chill on the tongue attacks, but I do want to use it for all his tilts. For the forward tilt, he quickly sticks his tongue out right in front of his opponent. Then, for the down tilt, he does pretty much the exact same attack, except down. And then for the up tilt, I think it'll be best compared to Mewtwo's up tilt, where he kind of flings his tongue in an arch upwards, similar to how Mewtwo does his tail, covering his whole body for a bit, meaning that it'll make for a good move to use as an anti-air. Now we have his regular smash attack, and these, my friends, are where we're going to start implementing more old school arcade Frogger into his character. For his forward smash, Frogger charges the iconic log from the water section and slams it down in front of the fighter. Pretty self-explanatory. For his up smash, we utilize the big bad alligators that come up and try to kill you.
I knew it!
Frogger would essentially spawn an alligator enemy upwards out of nowhere to chomp the opponent right in front of him. I also feel like it would be two hitboxes to the move. One where the alligator mouth scoops you up, and then the other where you get launched by the chomp. So I guess think of it kind of similar to Rob's up smash, where it has two different hitboxes. A scoop up hitbox and then a more powerful hitbox that launches you upward. Finally, for the down smash, we use the turtles, the other enemy in the water area. When charged, Frogger slams down on the ground, spawning the turtle from underwater, which would reference the turtles that bob up and down as they pass through. Then Frogger slams his hand on it to spawn the turtle outside the shell, with the hitbox being the jolt of his body coming out the turtle shell.
Now, moving on to the grab attack, I would say would be similar to Yoshi's, where he would grab his opponent with his tongue. But instead of whatever Yoshi is doing, he pelts the opponent with his flippers and batters them while still in his tongue grip. On to the throws we go, starting with the forward throw, where we have the return of the alligator, who comes through and chomps on the opponent, launching him forward. I kind of wanted to replicate similar movement to when the alligator enemy pops up in the frog hide, where he does a little chomping animation. For Frogger's back throw, keep it simple, he twirls himself to swing his opponent's back. Simple, but effective. Also stereotypically similar to a lot of other fighters, this is probably going to be his skill throw. For the up throw, Frogger throws the fighter up and hits him with his nose as he jumps from a lily pad, just referencing the hopping he does each time he jumps. Then finally for the down throw, similar to Frogger's down smash, he uses the turtle enemy again. Basically, he throws the fighter into the ground with like a ripple water animation to kind of indicate that this is an underwater attack. The turtle enemy comes up and blasts the fighter upwards with a shell, which could be a good combo starter to rake in some points. And what are those exactly? Well, Tiffany, if you sit down, maybe I'll talk about it later. Lastly, for the basic attacks, we have his aerial. Starting with his forward aerial, I'm actually going to say screw it and take inspiration from the original Frogs arcade game. You know, the game we mentioned before, where while the frog is jumping, he has his tongue extending forwards. It could be a reference to it, but it also just makes a lot of sense, so why not? Anyway, next we have the back air. Now for this, I'm going to take some inspiration from the box art for Frogger 2 3D. For the back air, he takes the bird in that box art and shoves it backwards in a similar fashion to how he does in the box. Now for the down air, I was originally going to do an attack similar to Greninja, where he kind of has a thrusting downwards attack, but instead I think it would distinguish him better if we don't do that. So instead, the attack is him throwing the purple fish from his jab downwards, and he bites down on the opponent to kind of spike them if you get it right. For his neutral aerial, we're going to use the other common characteristic of frogs, which is the expansion of their cheeks. Wrong image again! What the hell is going on? So similar to King K. Rool or Wario, Frogger would puff up his body to hit the opponent. And lastly, for the up aerial, Frogger would throw his feet in the air, similar to this picture in the Frogs arcade, which I think could work, and plus I think it looks pretty cool, honestly. And now, gamers and gameritas, we've made it to the interesting bit, the special moves. But first, I want to talk about the new mechanic I came up with for him. Now, as we discussed before, Frogger was originally an arcade game, and I kind of wanted to represent the whole score system in arcade games since that hadn't really been explored in other fighters. So, since Frogger is one of the faces of the arcade area, not as much as say like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, or Street Fighter, but those franchises are already represented in the game, so what are you gonna do? For Frogger, I introduced what I will dub as the high score mechanic, a system that allows players to always improve themselves, replicating that addictive nature that arcades had back in the day. So, for every attack you hit a fighter with, you gain 10 points, similar to how in the original Frogger, you gain 10 points for every step you take. Now, obviously, this would depend on the attack as well. For example, a successful smash attack would be worth more points than a regular jab or aerial, the other thing about this mechanic is that if you're able to string attacks together, the amount of points you normally get doubles. So for example, let's say you string 2 up airs together. The first one would earn 10 points and the next would earn 20. Then if you string another up air, it goes to 40 and so on and so forth. The advantage of having a higher score is that it does things like slightly make Frogger faster and increases the overall damage he does with each of his moves. As with a lot of mechanics, this is displayed on Frogger's bottom icon, where your score is there for you to track. If you lose a stock, the possible points you earn from doing attacks resets all the way back to 0. After reaching specific high scores, then that in turn will affect a couple of Frogger's B moves, which we'll go over now. So we'll start off with what I will call Snake. I know, I'm just like the pinnacle of creativity. And surprise, surprise, this would utilize the snakes that appear all throughout the Frogger arcade games. I had noticed that the snake is like the one enemy I haven't used in his moveset. Snake would work similarly to Pikachu's neutral B, where Frogger would summon it, causing it to slither across the stage, very much like how it does when it's on the grass portion of the Frogger level. Now, to incorporate the high score mechanic into it, we'll do so by saying when it gets to a certain amount of points, probably 1,000 or more, the snake attack becomes significantly faster and lasts a lot longer on the stage. Anyway, going from something incredibly simple to probably Frogger's most complicated attack I come up with, we have Frogger's side special. Now, I want to be completely transparent and say that this idea was not completely original, as I got it from Blue Pikmin 11 on Smashboards. I'm obviously going to put a little spin on it. Now, this attack, simply called Vehicle, involves a crazy amount of vehicles that pass by Frogger in quite a lot of the Frogger games, especially the arcade ones. These cars and trucks are such an iconic part of Frogger's entire brand, so I think it's only necessary to evolve them in some way, shape, or form. So for this attack, Frogger summons a certain vehicle towards a fighter, with his animation being that he dodges the car by jumping over it as he approaches out of thin air. The vehicles that get spawned range from power and speed depending on what gets summoned, in which, similar to Pac-Man's neutral B or Duck Hunt's down B, the summoning is in the order of this picture, with the first one being the red car, the most basic out of all the vehicles. The second one is the car with the plow thing that, when launched, sends the fighter upwards instead of forwards. These purple cars are the next thing, with its trait being that it has the chance of grounding the opponent for a little bit. Then there's the green and white race car. Wait, why is there a race car on the street? Isn't that kind of unsafe? What the hell is going on? Which is way faster than other cars, but it lacks in knockback. And finally, there's the big kahuna, the big truck at the end, which is overall the most powerful one and probably does the most knockback, being a pretty reliable kill move. But it is the slowest moving vehicle out of the 5 of them. And if you're having a hard time visualizing it, think of the Animal Crossing bus assist trophy in Smash Ultimate. But we're not done yet, gamers and gamer readers, as we always gotta add another layer to the puzzle. Now, while Frogger can spawn a total of 5 different vehicles total, I think it would be cool to base which cars come out and have it determined by the score Frogger has when using it. If the score is under 100, Frogger fails to dodge and gets hit himself instead. So little to say, I wouldn't recommend using it unless you like seeing frogs get run over, in which case I highly recommend you talk to someone about that. Now, if the score is between 100 and 500 points, there'll be a slight chance of Frogger hitting himself. However, a vehicle is more likely to pop out than anything. The only vehicle that pops out though is the red car, leaving much to be desired. Now, from the score being between 500 points and 1,000 points, we'll have Frogger not have the chance of being run over at all, and on top of that, you unlock being able to use the second vehicle in the arsenal. When you have points between 1,000 and 5,000 points, you unlock the third vehicle, the purple car. Having a score between 5,000 and 6,999 will unlock the fourth vehicle, the race car. And finally, having a score between 7,000 and 9,999 will allow you to use the trucks. And if you put the score at its absolute maximum, that being 10,000 points, the vehicles in general are stronger and quicker, but keep in mind that once again, this is only unlocked when you're at max score, which I imagine would take quite a lot of combos to get to. So overall, yeah, that's the idea for the Frogger side special. Once again, thanks to Blue Pikmin 11 for the general idea. Next, we have Frogger's up special, Leapfrog. This move has Frogger take a gigantic leap from a lily pad, similar to Sonic's spring pad recovery in Mega Man's Rush Coil. Also similar to Sonic's spring recovery, the lily pad can also do damage if it hits a fighter. Now, the reference of this is a combination of the super jump that Frogger does in the PlayStation 1 game, or the double jump in Swampy's Revenge. On top of all of that, it's also a reference to the lily pads that Frogger jumps over in most of the games too. When Frogger reaches 5,000 points or higher, however, Frogger will be able to hop forward slightly, giving some horizontal movement to his recovery, making it that much better. This script is so being aid, oh my gosh. And finally, for Frogger's down special, we have Bonus Frog. This involves Frogger spawning a tiny frog that jumps on his back. Very similar to the bonus frogs you can save from the logs in the arcade version. Using the little guy will double the amount of points you receive to your current high score automatically. But since you're protecting him, the damage done to you will also increase by like 1.5? Sorry, I'm not the best when it comes to damage, but you get the basic gist. Basically have it be a risk versus reward type move. And also, you can only spawn one at a time, and it only spawns for 30 seconds before disappearing. After 5 uses, referencing the amount of frogs needed to move on to another level, the move becomes obsolete until your next stock. Now, for the final smash, I call it Frog's Ray Gun Attack.
More like belongs in the trash.
Okay, fine, I'll do something else. Goodness gracious. So Frogger's new final smash idea is Frog Barrage, one of them dimension final smashes. So how it starts is Frogger gets alerted and ducks when he sees a giant truck steaming towards him. It then hits the fighter, which gets them sent to the road in Frogger, where afterwards a bunch of trucks straight steamroll them into oblivion. That's not all. Frogger and his friends come through and barrages the opponent, sending them flying. That's me calling it Frogger Barrage. It's kind of like a combination of Yoshi's final smash mixed in with the Prince Sable assist trophy. It's chaotic, but you know what? It works. And that, gamers and gameritas, is the main Frogger moveset. But if you don't know, we're far from over, as we still have some aesthetics to go over, like taunts, idle animations, and other notable stuff to mention. So let's start off with some taunts. So for Frogger's first taunt, I think we could reference Frogger Beyond, and Frogger would spin a coin on his nose to kind of show off, if that makes sense. For a second taunt, he could hop and do a backflip, then finally make a show-offy kind of pose at the end. Then, as much as I would love to do a hello my baby, hello my honey, hello my boy, I'm thinking maybe one of the smaller bonus frogs would spawn out and high-five him or something. Kind of like Morgana or the Slime on the Joker and the hero. Next, time for the idle animations. For the first one, I would say the Frogger sways his head in a back and forth motion faster than he would normally do. Kind of what he does in He's Back Frogger to give a bit of a visual. Then, for a second one, I think it'd be fitting to do something with flies, whether that be dragonflies or regular flies. Basically, a fly circles around and he gets distracted and follows it with his eyes before snapping back to his regular idle animation. Next, let's talk about the entrance animation. Unfortunately though, the idea is pretty boring. It's basically like a lot of fighters' entrance animations where they just literally jump into battle. Now, normally I don't talk about dying animations unless it could be something special, and for Frogger, I think it would be neat to reference Temple of the Frog and have it to where when he faints, his leg starts twitching, kind of similar to how he dies in that game. Then we have his victory stuff, like his animations and theme. Now the theme is pretty easy. Just do a remix of the original theme that plays when you gather all 5 frogs to the empty slots. For his first animation, Frogger hops around a lot and strikes a thumbs up pose when his name is screamed out, referencing when you complete a level in Frogger's Adventure, The Rescue. For his second victory animation, Frogger approaches the screen and dodges a bunch of cars that appear, then struts some kind of pose when his name is shown. Then finally, for his third victory animation, Frogger gets lifted up by his other 4 frog pals and gives him the old hip hip hooray thing as they throw him up in the air, and then at the apex, the announcer yells his name. The sweet satisfaction of victory. As for the costumes, I think referencing some of the different versions of Frogger would be pretty cool. I think one costume that would be cool is having a tree frog color palette, which, if I recall correctly, are present in some of the later Frogger games, like Frogger 3D for example. Maybe you can have a costume where he has like a white t-shirt and vest on, and maybe one where you give him a safari hat referencing that nasty ass version of Frogger that we're not going to talk about. Other than that though, I think one final little reference you can do is Golden Frogger, referencing the Golden Frog levels in Frogger for the PlayStation. And yeah, other than that, that's pretty much all I got for the little ad. So overall, what is the conclusion for Frogger, and how can we bring this all together? I had a couple goals when making Frogger's character. I wanted to A, make it so Frogger is an interesting fighter and not a Greninja 2.0. B, to primarily represent the arcade games with his moves and playstyle. And 3, to showcase the addictive nature of arcade games in general. My vision was to make Frogger a pretty fast character that's hard to hit, thus being very evasive overall. Throughout the moveset, if you guys haven't noticed, I actually made it to where Frogger's moves are not him directly throwing hands, but instead using his tongue to attack or having his enemies attack instead. For a visual, this represents the Frogger franchise as a whole and what it actually is. Aside from a few of the titles, Frogger doesn't fight, even in the games that have more creative freedoms in its gameplay. Instead, Frogger avoids damn near all his enemies, so I wanted to replicate that because it seems to be a defining trait that stays throughout the Frogger games and its development. This also helped me distinguish him from Greninja's moveset, since Greninja is more physical with his moves with his water katanas and whatnot. whatnot. I also took some things from Snake's design, since the Metal Gear Solid games are also stealth games. Or at least it used to be a stealth game. Now it's casino. In order to be successful with Snake and Smash Bros, you have to always be about 3 to 4 steps ahead at all times, analyzing the battlefield and taking advantage of the space you have. I think with Frogger, it's a similar thing, where you, as Frogger, must plan your attack ahead of your opponent, thus the integration of the score mechanic. I kind of wanted this character to be less of a brain-dead character, let me just use an attack here, and more of a character that has you think about what you should actually do in order to be successful with the fighter. What moves and combos are you going to do to unlock your perks as quickly as possible? When are you going to use the bonus frogs to get your score up? After all, you only have a limited amount that you can use. Those are kind of the steps and questions you have to ask yourself to be successful with the character. Similar to those arcade Frogger games where you have to plan out your path to get to the frog holes. And on top of all of that, gamers, we kill 2 birds with 1 stone, as the score mechanic is also used for the addictive nature of arcade games, as getting to that high score to unlock your perks as efficiently as possible is the goal. Therefore, each time you play, you'll want to get these perks as fast as you can, faster than before, thus at least kind of simulating that arcade addictiveness by trying to be better every time you decide to play Frogger. Overall, Frogger is a character who's pretty easy to get into, but just like a lot of arcade games, has a layer of potential that boosts him into entirely new heights when you give him the time of day. Let me know which fighter you guys want me to cover next, and with all that being said, you can put your spatulas down now, but keep it sizzling, my Baconators.